Hi, everybody. Welcome back. If you could take your seats, we're going to try and start right at 9:30 because we have a packed schedule again today. So welcome back for day 2 of the scientific conference of IODE XXV. I have a couple of logistics things. One is that it's been requested that people not view that we're live streaming this, which is working pretty well, but we've been asked not to live stream that while you're in this room. Watch the live version of the slides and the speaker because it has a negative impact on the Wi-Fi signal. So if people are streaming the talks in here at the same time we're trying to do the remote service for people that couldn't make it to this meeting, that makes a problem. So please don't live stream while you're in this room. There's one other thing. There was a scarf left. My assistant, Norio Baba, is holding it up. This scarf was left at the reception last night. It looks like maybe a very nice pashmina. So we would like to reunite that scarf with its owner if possible. It looks like no one recognizes that. All right, we'll try again maybe before the lunch break. Claudia, is somebody going to queue up those slides? Thanks.
Thanks for reminding me of my job.
So while Claudia is queuing up the slides, I have some introductory comments to make to get us started today with a very special event. It's the first in a brand new series of lectures honoring the memory of Fred Grassley. Ward Appletons of OBIS asked me to say a few introductory remarks because I had the distinct pleasure of working with Fred. Fred gave me my first job well, not my first job in oceanography, but he was the reason I was able to come and to be on staff at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution all the way back in the 70s. Thank you, perfect. All right, so that's all the organizational stuff. So I'm going to try and keep to the schedule, hopefully with this. So J. Frederick Grassley, or Fred as people knew him, that had called him, that knew him, loved small organisms. It was what he made his career on, benthic organisms in particular, but his legacy really comes from the fact that he was a big thinker. He really had several careers, but what he will probably be best known for are some large global programs that he had the courage to think of and was the sort of person that could actually pull that off. Fred started he did his undergraduate work at Yale, moved on to Duke. He ended his career at Rutgers University as the director of the Institute of Marine and Coastal Sciences. He was the author of over 80 publications. He had many species of marine organisms named after him. That's quite an honor. Most people never have a single organism. He had an entire genus of polychaete worms named for him. He was awarded several prestigious medals. The one I want to highlight is the Japan Prize that he received in 2013. He was quite honored by that. It's a very prestigious prize. He was at Woods Hole in 1975 when Emperor Hirohito of Japan visited Woods Hole, and Emperor Hirohito was a marine biologist himself. He's the author of several publications, scientific papers, and his particular specialty was hydroids. And so when he came to Woods Hole, of course, there were lots of official events that had been planned, but The emperor made it very clear that what he really wanted to do was go to the labs at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and look at hydrates. So here he is here, looking at the microscope, and the gentleman behind him there, and also here, people in this room may recognize as Dr. Susumu Hanjo, who was a geologist at Woods Hole at that time. So Emperor Hirohito loved his visit to Woods Hole. It was quite an honor for the scientists at Woods Hole to receive him, and I think he enjoyed his time, and the Empress was with him as well at that time. That was during the time when Fred was in Woods Hole, 1969 to 1989, the Woods Hole oceanographic years of his career, really in the middle of his career. His early research focus was on marine benthic communities, deep sea biodiversity in particular. He also had some funding to study the way communities recover from perturbations like oil spills, hydrocarbon pollution. Fred split his time pretty equally between research cruises, which he loved. He loved being at sea, loved the excitement of discovery. And you see him on the left there. That's a very typical photo of him surrounded by sampling gear and samples that had been brought up from the bottom of the ocean. And then on the right, also a typical photo, big smile. He's a big man. If people have never met him, he was over 6 feet tall. Big man, big personality, and a big smile as well. But his career and marine biology changed dramatically in 1977 with a cruise to the Galapagos Rift off the coast of Ecuador. In February 1977, research vessel Nor and Lulu, accompanied by the submarine Alvin and a crazy, there's Nor and Lulu, and this crazy steel contraption of a sled called Angus that was instrumented with cameras and some other instrumentation, with geologists, geochemists, and geophysicists on board, went to the Galapagos Rift. They were specifically looking for rift communities. They had seen evidence of them in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, but this is when the hydrothermal vents were discovered. It was quite an extraordinary cruise, but as I said, they had geologists, geochemists, and geophysicists on board. So on the right-hand photo there they are in the main lab on Nor, and they're looking at images coming back from the Angus sled. And at the time, those were black and white, and they start to see these extraordinary communities on the bottom of the ocean. People had never seen anything like this. They were so excited, but there weren't any biologists on board. They were geophysicists. But they started to see amazing imagery, things that no one had ever seen before. This is at 2,500 meters, so these thriving communities. So clearly, there's no sunlight down there. What they realized is that they needed biologists on the next cruise. That was one conclusion that they made very quickly. And so when they came back, there were scientists from Woods Hole on that cruise, and they came back, and Fred Grassley, being a benthic ecologist, was one of the first people that wanted to talk to them. So Fred led an effort, and they wrote proposals. It took them a couple of years to get the funding. They did succeed in getting funding from the National Science Foundation for a cruise to revisit the Galapagos Rift. And Fred realized that he needed to hire more benthic taxonomists because there was clearly a lot of work to do. I was fortunate enough at the time, that's me on the right. Yutaka showed a picture of himself decades ago. There's my photo of your IODE co-chair decades ago. I was a benthic taxonomist in those days. Princess Polychaete was how people referred to me. And I want to remind you that this is what photographs usually look like of the bottom of the ocean at 2,500 meters. All right, so in January 1979, the biologists got to go to the Galapagos Rift. They went with the Lulu again as the tender for the submarine Alvin and the RV Gillis. And it was very much a multidisciplinary team of geologists, geochemists, biologists, also engineers, because they needed to design a lot of new equipment, and photographers as well, specifically from the National Geographic Society. There's Fred in the ball of the Alvin submarine. On dive number 884, finally got to see what he'd been hearing about for a couple of years. I can only imagine how excited he must have been. And so this is a photo of him taken by Al Giddings of the National Geographic Society. So at the time, there are 3 people in the ball of the Alvin, a pilot, and 2 scientists. In this case, one of the scientist spots was given to Al Giddings of the National Geographic Society. So for an hour or so, this is what they see. They've been waiting for years, and they have to sit and look at the blackness of the ocean as they go down. And it takes over an hour to get the submarine down to 2,500 meters. And they turn on the lights of the submarine, and this is what they see out the porthole of the submarine. Fred is quoted as saying that nothing could diminish the excitement of the first view they had of the life at the bottom of the ocean at this rift. It was quite a fantastic moment. They're looking at communities that are thriving down there, organisms that are enormous, bigger than anybody had ever seen on the bottom of the ocean at this depth. And they're not powered by the sun. They're powered by chemosynthesis. It was quite an extraordinary discovery. This is a photo from a NOAA Oceanus Explorer expedition. The red pigment there on those riftia, these are polychaetes, these large tube worms, is hemoglobin, which is how they were breathing down there. But in addition to those, there were clams, mussels, anemones, crabs. It was just thriving communities of organisms, quite an amazing moment in marine biology. They had, these are Galatheid crabs that were scampering is the word they use, scamper, a lot of activity, very active communities, scampering about on the mussel beds, on the pillow lava. As I said, they also had engineers involved in this that were very much engaged in the design of this research program. They had worked for a couple of years to design brand new specialized equipment. In particular, this is a respirometer, to figure out how these communities were living down there, based on chemosynthesis, not photosynthesis. So this is a cruise I was on with Fred in 1978. This is aboard the Lulu, the tender at the time for the Alvin submarine. Fred was an avid reader. He was an avid writer as well, as you can tell from 80 publications. He often read when he was at sea. It was one of his favorite things to do when we weren't actively sampling. And I think that for most scientists, the discovery of the hydrothermal vents probably would have been enough for one career, but not Fred. He, as I said in the title, he studied small organisms, but what he was really known for were those big, really big ideas. And he had the courage to follow those through and put together the resources to make those large ideas a reality. In particular, 2 of his big ideas. One was the Census of Marine Life, which then led to the Ocean Biogeographic Information System, or OBIS. And one of the things I'll also point out for this data exchange committee was that Fred was one of the first scientists I worked with that recognized the value of metadata. Metadata itself may be not too interesting to scientists, but Fred recognized that to get the really big science and the synthesis science and to work with researchers from other disciplines, they needed to document the data, and in that case, physical samples as well, to exchange with colleagues so that they could really think about the bigger questions. And as I said, this led to those global ocean biogeographic programs that we're very grateful to Fred for having the courage to think of those. So that's Fred. Those are 2 very typical photos, always smiling and then thinking all the time as well. He was an extraordinary, extraordinary man. I'm so honored that I had the chance to work with him and just be near him when he was being such a wonderful person. Yep. Okay, you want me to go? Okay. So that's the end of my introductory slides. And now I have the honor of introducing our lecturer this morning. As I mentioned at the end of that talk, Dr. Grassley was one of the founding fathers of OBIS. To honor his memory, OBIS has created a lecture series in celebration of his vision. The vision to bring together marine species distribution data into a common searchable format for science and for future generations. Last fall, in 2018, OBIS selected nominations of outstanding scientists and data managers who have made a significant contribution to OBIS in a variety of ways, including data, tools, scientific publications that use the data available from OBIS. The selection committee has chosen Dr. Yoshihisa Shirayama, whose major research field is marine biology, especially taxonomy and the ecology of the deep sea myobenthos. So I think it's especially appropriate that he's the first selection for this lecture. Dr. Shirayama has already received several prestigious awards for his research excellence in the field of marine biology, including the Cosmos International Prize in 2011 for his work as a member of the Scientific Steering Committee on the Census of Marine Life. Dr. Shirayama has been involved in OBIS since the early days, and in 2001, he became a member of the OBIS International Committee. He is currently the director of the Global Oceanographic Data Center of JAMSTEC, as well as an associate executive director of that prestigious organization. And they also operate the Japan OBIS node. So now it is my pleasure to introduce the person selected to present the very first lecture in the Fred Grassley Memorial Lecture Series, Dr. Yoshihiro Shirayama.
Congratulations. Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great honor to be selected as the first lecturer of the Fred Grassley Memorial Lecture Series in IODE XXV. It's a big surprise for me. At the very beginning, I was get some information about this from Ward Appleton or other Japanese colleagues who are working very hard for the current OBIS. But also, it's great news for me spending almost 30 years with Fred. My history with Fred starts 1982 when I have just finished my doctoral thesis. He provided me some suggestions about the editing for the publications, and a face-to-face meeting was held in 1985 at Hamburg at the first Deep Sea Biology Symposium was held under the supervision of the Dr. Thiel. Maybe these names are too old for you to. But anyway, so as a memorial lecture, I'd like to introduce the history of the census of marine life because it's the OBIS was developed as a part of the four major goals of the census of marine life. And then I'd like to introduce briefly about the history of OBIS as well. And also, I'd like to conclude or evaluate the OBIS as a legacy of census of marine life. So the history started at July 2nd, 1996. It's more than 20 years ago. Fred visited Jesse Osbell, who was the vice president of the Sloan Foundation, and asking to support the big global scale science under the, say, recognition which was provided by National Research Council under the title Understanding Marine Biodiversity, a research agenda for the nations. And following slides and some of the photographs, I could not follow who took that, so the credit is missing partially. But many slides and the photographs were provided by Jesse Osbell as well as Mark Costello, who has been the chair of the Orbis International Committee. So the very first, I'd like to apologize for that point. But anyway, so this visit and before the phone call is the beginning of this census of my life. And after that, 3 years feasibility study have been carried out. Under the three questions, one is could it be done, would it be done, and should it be done? And the first question, should it be done, is very clear because at that time the marine environment is getting worse and worse by the many activities on the oceans. And would it be done? It is slightly hard to overcome because there are so many different cultures among marine biologists. It's very difficult to communicate to each other between the deep sea biologist with the coastal marine biologist, etc., etc. And could it be done at the time of the 90s is the emerging period for the development of the technologies on marine biology as well as ocean science and also information technologies. So in the coming 10 years, if we could utilize all these development, probably it may be possible to do some census of marine life in the global scale. So the Sloan Foundation decided to support this project, and Census of Marine Life was launched at the year of 2000. Some of you may remember that the catchphrase of the Census of Marine Life is making ocean life count. And we made some small clips for advertising this project, and it was fraud in the CNN. And very interestingly, that video clip was open to the public only outside of USA using the CNN channel to make this project international as much as possible. But anyway, the Census of Marine Life had 4 components. One is what did live in the ocean. The second is what does live in the ocean. And the third is what will live in the ocean. And the fourth component, which is how to access and visualize data on living marine resources, that is the concept of Orbis, which is again introduced the big idea of Fred Grassley. So after the first call, there were 2 workshops for designing the census of marine life. And then after the third workshop, the census launched at the year of 2000. And this is the year, again, the Orbis was launched with census of marine life. And to carry out this project in an international manner, International Scientific Steering Committee was established in 1999 before the formal launch of Census of Marine Life. And at the very first meeting was held, there were only 10 steering committee members were selected, and I was very fortunately selected to be one of that, simply because Fred knew me, and he probably needs some Japanese to join it. But I'd like to emphasize that Patricio Bernal, who was the director of the IOC, was also a member of this first International Scientific Steering Committee of the Census of Marine Life. Then the members have been changed or evolved with time, and the number increased at the year, for example, 2004, the number is much more than 10. And also, the International Secretariat was formally established in the Core Ocean, which is now not Core Ocean, it's ocean leadership in United States. And also there was an educational outreach group was established in University of Rhode Island. I'd like to emphasize the characteristic of Census Marine Life is spending a huge effort for the public outreach. About 1/3 of the budget was used for this in the total budget of Census Marine Life. And so yesterday there was some discussion, the IODE data, how to disseminate this information to the public. Maybe the effort we need to spend very huge. And a good example is, I think, Census of Marine Life. Anyway, so these steering committees met a variety of places, for example, in the very windy Aberdeen, or very south Punta Arenas, or at the Azores, and the onboard ship of the Geozaus, which Norway have built mainly for the Census of Marine Life, or in Australia, in the tropical rainforest, or in Nara, Japan, Fred was praying, following the Japanese style, or Quito, to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the hydrothermal vent ecosystem research. Or even we went to Antarctic. He was sitting outside the blizzard. Oh, very sunshine, big sunshine. So with the development of Census of Marine Life, we had a history of Orbis. The history of Orbis is very similar to the history of the Census of Marine Life, but its initial idea was developed in the pre-COML workshop in 1997, and the website demonstration was already started in 1998, and that was based on the Sloan Founder. Then the Orbis workshop was held in 1999, and the formal Orbis was launched at the year of 2000 under the support of National Ocean Partnership Program. And then the International Steering Committee was formed in 2001, and the funding from the NSF, or National Ocean Partnership Program, have been continued. And I would like to introduce some slides which was used to the International Steering Committee of the Census of Marine Life in the year of 2004. What was 2007 Orbis was. At that time, International Committee was these staffs. Also, technical working group was held. And then there was several international committee meetings in 2003 or 2004 in San Diego Supercomputer Center or Halifax, under the support of, I think, Ron O'Donnell from the Halifax. So this is the very first members of Orbis. There are 8 marine biodiversity database over there joining to the Orbis. So Orbis is a kind of portal of these 8 and some additional biodiversity databases. And OBIS already have the architectures like a portal and survey, collecting the information from the data servers associated with the OBIS as a whole. This is the very first front page of the international OBIS. You can see how many what is inside, and there are countable number of the databases which is contributing to OBIS. And if you go to a little bit deep for the search pages, there are only these numbers of the databases are listed here. But the concept of the search image is very similar to right now. So puts the scientific name or select the areas to be searched and go to the search for the data inside of the OBIS. And the return is like this. But the characteristics of OBIS at the very beginning is they already had mappers inside. It's very unique. And how to visualize the data to the public was the very first image of OBIS, and now already at the very beginning it was realized. Even there are two mappers inside of OBIS at the very beginning. One is developed by CSIRO and the other is developed in I think Kansas University. And at the May 2003, they said they have 860 records in there, about 57 species, 1,000 species. And the biggest provider to that OBIS at that point was Fishbase and Fishnet. So mainly the OBIS was an information system of fishes at that time. And some additional data providers were already exist. They are voluntary providers, but it includes even a history of marine animal populations, which is one of the core project of Census of Marine Life. And at that time, they envisaged that they want to have better search and retrieval engines. They are looking at the new technologies. And also even they are looking at the physical environmental data integration at that time. It is now implemented in the current OBIS systems. If you look back at the year of about 2000, it is at a time where there are many, many initiatives for making the database of the biodiversity. For example, in Japan, there was a project called Species 2000 in collaboration with the UK and European countries. So it's a time for emerging database project in the global scale. But within that, OBIS has a very leading roles, at least for the marine biological database. But at that time, the link of Census of Marine Life to IODE was not seen in their presentation. Unfortunately, I do have some project with IOC Westpac, so we had a Westpac communication with OBIS, but in the global scale, the IODE and the OBIS was not interlinked before. And also, even at that time, the funding concern was exist over there. even at the year of 2004, we have discussed how to continue the legacy of this project. But they always have a meeting continues, and the key of that was, I think, the collaboration with Encyclopedia of Life. That will let integrate variety of information about a single species with not only the biogeographic information, but also, for example, literacy information, etc., etc. That will make OBIS very, very popular throughout the world. And the international project of census was providing many data. And the OBIS data point was increased to this coverage at the year of 2006. And the record is about 8 million at that time. And the developing of OBIS is continued. But they have some problems, for example, mostly in shallow waters, or very limited to the taxonomic groups, and the bias for the geographic distribution of data. And the OBIS is still working or struggle for the following or how to keep the legacies. But the Census of Marine Life have ended at 2010 with a huge success. More than 2,700 scientists, 80 countries, and a lot of the legacies. And we could find a lot of information about biogeography or biodiversity of the marine species. And even we could make a map of the biodiversity in the global scale. This is what Fred wanted to make it. And the final gathering was held in San Francisco, I think, on the cruise ship. And the Census of Marine Life steering committee get an award of the Cosmos Prize. So the founder of Census, the Jesse Oswell, was very happy. And at that time, the chairperson of International Steering Committee was Ian Poyner from Australia, so he was awarded. The real medal is displayed in the Ocean Hall of Smithsonian Institution Natural History Museum. So please go there if you want to see it. After that, we are very much worried about what the OBIS will go, but I would like to say it's continue to grow. This is before the census of the end of Census of Marine Life, and this is after the finish of Census of Marine Life, and the number of the data or number of database contributing to OBIS is still increasing. That is great, and and the other point is they are starting to contribute to science in real. Many publications are based on the information stored in OBIS, and also it's now globally used. And so many papers are based on the data or information in OBIS. So at the year of 2004, the goal of OBIS was next generation information infrastructure for marine biology and living marine resource management. I would say at that time, today, OBIS is beyond the original vision there, and now it's a basic, not only basic, but prerequisite infrastructure for the oceanography as well as marine biology. Thank you very much for your attention.
But I need to save this first.
サンキューベリマッチ、白山先生。で、 we moving into the next part, which is number 6, the future of IoT and the emerging opportunities, including UN decade, which we have 4 presentations here. And actually, the IOD has already tried to restructure our management structure a couple of years ago toward our future. I mean, IOD's future. So I would like to have the positive or constructive suggestions from all the presentation here. I'd like to invite the first one, the ocean best practices activities by the joint J. Berman and Miss Pauline Simpson. Pauline? Okay. Okay, sure. Tobias first. Okay. I'm sorry for that. The second presentation, I see. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Okay. Hi, Tobias. Are you okay? Are you ready?
Are you ready? Because they can't hear you. You just can hear me.
Yes, go ahead. I'd like to invite Tobias Spears for the IOC data and data system.
Yeah, you're live, so you can start.
Oops. I try to find my share screen here.
No, but he has to do the screen. No, he has to share his screen.
Yeah, it's not giving me a share screen on this computer for some reason. Oh, there it is. Perfect.
Do you find it?
Yeah.
Mute this side.
No. It's okay. Okay, Tobias, we don't hear you?
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, it's perfect now.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tobias Spears, and the title of this presentation is Ocean Data and Information System, a Catalog of Sources. So this presentation is intended to provide a bit of history and a short update on the work that's been underway with OTIS, and to provide some insight into where we hope OTIS will go. So a bit of history. In 2016, there was an audit of the IOC, and that included the IOC Marine Data and Information Exchange System. So that would include basically IODE and the whole data and information management environment. There were a number of observations that came out of the audit. It was noted that there was no single database or common database for all of marine science, which is not surprising given the breadth of fields. There were a large number of systems and websites that were observed and perceived or deemed to be out of date or not relevant. There were many barriers to data and information exchange and integration, differences in technology, issues surrounding real or perceived competition between IODE stakeholders. Many organizations providing what seem to be duplicative systems or data and information. And And because of disparities in available resourcing, funding, people, infrastructure, the member states are not always able to participate equitably in the community. The result was a recommendation coming out of the audit. The auditors recommended that the IOC call on the member states to work together and to construct a universal information system, an ocean data portal, and to provide a cost-benefit analysis in advance of IODE session. So it would have been IODE 24. So in response to the audit, a concept was developed, and so this is the first concept that was presented at IODE 24. And I guess what is important is that at the onset, it was recognized that in order to really achieve the goals of the recommendation from the audit, IODE needed to support expert and non-expert users, to be able to integrate both data and information, and to be able to work across systems because of the enormous suite of systems in the marine landscape. A concept paper was developed and presented at IODE 24, and the decision was made that IODE would work with its stakeholders, both within and outside the IOC, to basically improve the access, discoverability, and interoperability of data information, and also to work towards actually developing the global data information system referred to in the audit. So this system was called the IOC Ocean Data Information System. And what is important here is that IODE specifically is looking at establishing and using established systems where they exist. One of the concerns raised at IODE 24 was the lack of available funding and resources within IOC to really build and sustain a system on this scale on its own. So the second decision that was made was to establish an intersessional working group to continue the development of the OTIS concept and to undertake some short-term development activities to advance the concept itself. So the intersessional working group met in March of 2018. And taking a step back from the original concept, the group discussed three potential options for OTIS. The first was a simple list of links, and these types of lists already exist. The group decided fairly quickly that this really was not where we wanted to stop with OTIS, because it really did not provide a lot of value back to users. There was some discussion about the development of a repository of sources. So rather than trying to build an omnibus data and information system that is available and able to deliver data from all the contributing systems on day one, to start by simply getting the IODE member states to identify data systems, websites, data catalogs, and other sources where they exist, and to have a registry of those sources, and to use that as a way to help guide expert and non-expert users to relevant resources without having them resort to simply resorting to using commercial web search engines to find those resources. The third option, which aligned pretty closely with the original concept that was presented at IODE 24, was the development of a central portal to allow both the discovery and access to data and information. The group concluded very quickly that the third option was not realistic at the time, simply because of the substantial resource requirements in order to actually deliver that. So the group settled on developing something along the lines of option 2, which is a repository of sources, and to actually build that in such a way that in the future it could contribute towards an option 3, no matter where and how that was implemented. So what that means for the user is to have an Otis landing page where it's very easy to search among registered resources and really taking away a lot of the noise that you find when using your typical web browser to look for sites of interest. And this was something that was felt could be done because there were inventories that already existed that could be leveraged, and using the NODC contacts in the member states, it was felt that additional information could be pulled together into a catalog without a lot of undue effort. So the team at Viz, taking information from previous inventory exercises and technology from other development they've done, developed an initial Otis prototype for discussion with the intersessional working group. So it was a very simple prototype, essentially having an interface of facets, a series of data systems and catalogs and organizations that were registered, and providing an ability to simply select and deselect facets, and with that, have the organizations and resources appear and disappear from the search results. So it was a very limited prototype. It was not based on any formalized metadata scheme, but I think it enforced the need to have some intelligent design at the outset in terms of how we actually describe the resources that would go into Otis. Because having these types of faceted search facilities would really facilitate an easy discovery of useful resources. In the fall of 2018, the expert team on data management practices met in Ostend, and part of that meeting was focused on activities related to Otis, and a couple of key activities that were undertaken by ETDMP included the development of a draft proposal for a metadata scheme for Otis, along with some work on identifying some key vocabularies to help standardize some of the content that would be populated in the system. The group also had discussions with other IODE initiatives, such as the Ocean Best Practices Scheme, as there were other technological developments that were seen to be potentially useful in the future of Otis. And also the group talked about potentially refocusing some of the resources formerly focused solely on ODP to actually assist in advancing the Otis concept. So following ETDMP, between the ETDMP, the members of the Intersessional Working Group, and the IoT Project Office, a metadata scheme was finalized as a first draft for discovery in Otis. It's based upon mixed standards, including ISO 19115, Dublin 4, and schema.org. And a number of established vocabularies were identified and incorporated the standard. So using the updated metadata scheme, the IODE Project Office developed a second Otis prototype. So this prototype had more intelligence behind it than the first version. It implemented the metadata scheme that was developed in partnership with ETDMP. There were some rounds of feedback provided to the developer in the IODE Project Office, and this system is now online and I think was announced last week. So what we have again is a system that allows for very simple access to a register of over 300 resources the last time we checked. By selecting type of system of interest, part of a more detailed search facility is populated, and the list of 300 or so resources that were identified by the NODCs is filtered. So this is a good starting point and delivers, from a technical perspective, the spirit of what the Intersessional Working Group pursue in the short term. So in terms of the project status, much of the short-term work is on hand. So anything in green is essentially completed. But there is some major activity that will be needed between now and June and July of 2019. Specifically, finalizing the IODE concept paper, developing cost-benefit analysis for developing the next round of IODEs, and a proposal for how IODEs is going to evolve. And ultimately, the goal is to have the next iteration of IODEs presented at the IODE XXV conference in Portugal next year, depending on the availability of resources. So part of this week will be to provide an update to the IODE member states, but also to seek their participation in populating content using the system that was advertised last week. The IODE project office is looking to collect feedback on the prototype and suggestions on enhancements to help plan future development, and also to begin some discussions on developing use cases to provide some potential value-added products coming from that inventory. Ultimately, the goal is for IODEs to be useful, and any improvements for improving the usability of the catalog, that feedback would be appreciated, and also any potential extensions to the metadata content. And finally, the intersessional working group will be looking to finalize the next round of that IODES concept paper and the cost-benefit analysis for IFC. In the future, regardless of where IODES ends up, so IODES is currently being developed and hosted by the IODE project office, that may not be where it lands in the longer term. But ultimately, what we want is we want to have an IODES that has a register of relevant sources. We want to see, we use IODES as a way to find other relevant organizations and systems to foster collaboration at the working level. And we want to see that and data and information from the consenting systems that are registered in IODES to have a facility to actually deliver lower level data and information products to users. And the hope is that if IODES is useful, all of this lower level work will continue to feed IODES at a higher level. And so for more information, there is a poster in the poster areas, and Arno is available and is able to provide a demo for a prototype, both facilities for submitting resources and also for querying and seeing the results. And if there are any questions, feel free to ask.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Tobias. Thank you. See you.
Thank you, Tobias. Okay, I'm sorry for that. We go back to the first presentation again. The ocean best practices. The J. Perman and Ms. Pauline Simpson. The first. J first. Okay.
Yes, that's fine. Out here.
Okay. Yeah.
Good morning. I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to talk about the ocean best practices system. Yesterday, we had a lot of really good discussion about the value of data and the need to have it open and fair. And I think that's the background for the discussion we're going to have now. In fact, data is valuable, but to understand what the ones and the O's, the digital data means, you have to understand the processes of how it was collected and what's gone into it to make it useful, fit for purpose, if you want to call it that. That started the dialogue of the idea of a archive repository for methodologies. Methodologies then become an essential element of the sphere and the ecosystem of data and data usage. And that's what we'd like to talk about today. I have as a partner for my presentation, Pauline Simpson. She'll give the second half of it. Now, when we started talking about this a couple of years ago, there was no precedent per se of a comprehensive repository for best practices. And we had a debate of what it meant, and we drew the community together. So we had workshops and town halls and other things. And the idea was to first build a vision and then a mission statement that goes with it. And after struggling with words for a long time, Tosta reminded us that visions usually don't have words longer than 6 letters and are understood by all. And that represented an interesting challenge. And you can see from our vision statement, we didn't quite succeed in limiting the length of some of the words, but our goal is important. The vision is something we're looking at in the future. It's not what we can do now, but it's where we want to be in the next decade. This is a very nice discussion for the decade of ocean sciences. So we have to have agreed methods for every activity in ocean observing, research, operations, and applications that are broadly adopted. And I want to emphasize here that we're looking across the value chain. It's not just the measurement in the ocean. It's not just a particular element in the data. It's how we turn information into societal impact. And so when we talk about best practices, it is in the broad sense of those words. So how do we get there? What's the mission to make that vision a reality? And here again, a few words to keep in mind as we move forward: to provide and sustain a system which fosters collaboration, consensus building, and innovation by providing coordinated and global access to best practices across the ocean sciences. And here I use the word ocean sciences, and sometimes I think maybe a better word is ocean observing, because observing goes all the way across the value chain. This is what we were looking at, and the question is, how do we take these and actually turn them into a system? And so we had a workshop in November 2017 at IOC, in which we brought together senior members of the community. And these were people who did data, people who were doing observations, people who were doing applications. And we said, what type of system do you need? And these are, in a high level, what we came up with: living, sustained, comprehensive system for ocean observing best practices. And the importance of sustained and living can't be underestimated, because people won't engage, won't commit, unless they know something will be there for the long term. Academic recognition was important. Many times best practices end up in somebody's drawer, or they're done through oral history, and that doesn't give you the sustained capability that you need. And here I think I want to point out that as we move to understanding climate and climate change, we're talking about tens of years, maybe decades, and you have to understand what was taken 10, 20, 30 years ago and how it was taken. And so the idea of best practices and getting the academic community engaged through career advancement through peer review became an important part of what we did, in addition to the DOI's digital object identification. We wanted to make search engines more effective, and I'm talking about Google. Can Google find all of the best practices that we want? Other search engines also. A training resource, and I'm talking about here both training for the research community, but developing countries and a broader scope of things. And finally, greater interoperability across programs and institutions. Now, I wanted to bring this home to the community here. And so I take a quote from something that we have in one of our papers, and that is the widespread availability of best practices is as important as the fundamental concept of data sharing and open data. And what do we mean by that? Well, we recognize that there's a huge loss if data just goes into somebody's drawer, and that we fail in creating more open data and in linking data among the different sectors of our community. There's also a comparable statement for best practices. There's a huge cost in poor knowledge acquisition or attrition of the expertise that can be avoided by having systematic implementation of ocean best practices and the transfer of the methodologies across the community, working together, particularly as you have chemists working with biologists, working with physical oceanographers, and then going into the application areas. So this was the challenge that we have. It's a challenge of data, it's a challenge of best practices. How do we actually put the system together? I'm not going to go through this in detail, but there were some major, what you call legs of the stool, major components of the system that became very, very important. The first and the obvious is the repository, and that's a repository of ocean best practices at IODE, and I would say the working relationship with the community with IODE has been wonderful. It shows the value chain going across that. I mentioned peer review, and there are two types of peer reviews. Those that programs do, like GoShip has its own peer review, but there aren't many other options if you're not part of a very large project. And so we created a journal, basically a research topic in Frontiers in Marine Science, to do peer review of methodologies. And I have to say it's gone very, very well. We originally said, well, we'll make 10 in a year, and we're at 10 months and we have 14 papers and continuing to grow. So that's exciting. We have to bring technology to bear to the IODE so that search becomes easier. Natural languages, things that you want so that most people can use it rather than just experts in the data area. And I think that you saw for Otis the same comments that were made just a few minutes ago. And finally, training. Training is an important element, and we're looking to Ocean Teacher Global Academy as the core for that. But there are other organizations, we've talked to POGO and others that are interested in doing things. So let me talk for a moment about this technology and where we take it. One of the things to do is to be able to search documents so you know what's in them. And in the new forms of natural language search, we've implemented that in the repository. And what happens is, as a document comes in, it gets tagged according to vocabularies. And so all of the words in various paragraphs are now known to you. And you can do a search for a particular word, salinity, or even the law of the sea, and you can get information for particular best practice documents. That's a challenge, and it's a challenge for the community as a whole, because we started out using various ontologies, various ways to look at vocabularies, and we have the chemistry ontology, we have the environmental ontology, but there's still a lack of good vocabularies for the ocean community. And there's good work being done at BODC and other places, and we've absorbed that and we're integrating that into the system and helping that move forward. Finally, I would say in the sense of working together, that we work closely with the community. We had a workshop, as I mentioned, in Paris in 2007, and another one recently, December 2018. In the first one, the question came up, what is a best practice? It's not a trivial question. And you can go back to the literature and see what other communities have done. And we came up with this definition, and it would be good if you can think about it and give us feedback. Community best practice is a methodology that has repeatedly produced superior results relative to other methodologies with the same objective. The objective is very, very important. And elevating to a best practice comes when more than one group uses it and adopts it. And so with that, I just want to come back to the subjects of this particular meeting, and then I'll turn the presentation over to Pauline. When we look at data flow and integration, there are a lot of issues we need to look at methodologies, and that's data assimilation, curation, validation. Then data harmonization, and how, in fact, do we evaluate the data itself, leading to data management. So if you go around all of these issues, these are the things which we, the community, have to address in the area of data flow and integration. And with that, I'd like to turn over my partner, Pauline Simpson.
Thank you, Jerry. Our need now is to actually transition ocean best practices from being a development project into operational status. So our main need is to find a long-term home for OBPS, the Ocean Best Practices System. And I think probably you would all agree that IOC is a logical and trusted location for this to be located. And from that, of course, IODE is the logical support and host system and management for the repository and the system itself. And of course, IODE can help us with the IT support that is so important for these information products. IODE and Goose have come together and agreed that they will jointly request the establishment of a formal OBPS project under the IOC umbrella. And of course, to be that, they have to go through some formal review processes and acceptances, and I've just listed the main ones here. The IODE Management Group has already reviewed the project proposal in December, and we've passed that one hurdle. I hate to call them hurdles, but the next one is this week, when we will be presenting it at the IODE committee. Goose Steering Committee will be looking at it in May, and it will finally end up with the IOC Assembly in June. Once it's a formal project, of course, it will have its own steering group, and that will be established, and it will be established from members of this community, the IODE community, but also Goose, the ocean observing community itself. And one of their main tasks will be actually to build on the success. Jay has very nicely described where we are at the moment, and I think you can see that there have been some advanced technology enhancements that really make the system worthy of continuation. And so we will build on that, and we will build on the success of the last 2 years. But it will also seek and build on the synergies with IODE and Goose activities. And I'm just going to identify just a couple or three of the IODE activities that obviously ocean best practices will be linked to and joined up with, which is quite a good phrase. So we just heard about ODIS, and obviously ocean best practices is going to be a prime data source for that. Also within the repository, we are intending in the next few months to implement a community review platform within the repository itself. So we will be providing a mechanism for the community to actually provide feedback directly to the authors, so that the authors and the feedback creator will actually be in dialogue together. But there's also a suggestion, and it's not frivolous, and you could give us feedback on this, is that perhaps we also need a less formal mechanism of just clicking on the clicking on a thumbs up on the interface. But there are considerations when you have that sort of mechanism that we need to address. It's mainly for best practices, of course, a review process, but also we're already in discussion with the Ocean Data Standards part of IODE, and they're thinking of using this review mechanism to have an initial review procedure for their data standard proposals. And for training, ocean best practices training, Jay's already spoken about this, but very much the Ocean Teach Global Academy will lead in collaboration with other training organizations like POGO, as mentioned, to provide training on not only the use of the best practice, but actually how to create a best practice. And that's something that we're actually doing within the system, is that we offer templates, particularly at the moment, just 3 for sensors, for ocean applications, and for data management. So we're trying to harmonize and formulate and create machine-readable formats that will take us through to a one-click submission process. But these training processes will be in person initially, but we'd like to move to virtual courses, to blended, having in-person and virtual as well. And of course, there will be summer schools and workshops that possibly collaborating organizations might help us organize. It can be provided in multi-languages because, as you've heard, the regional training centers offer their local languages, their local lectures. So that will be a very good way of actually training a much larger global community. And we will actually be including in the training the train-the-trainer process, so that people go out to their own regions and start training. And just to remind us all that the training video itself will actually be linked to the repository. IOC has lots of activities and large programs. They all produce best practices, so that's going to be a really rich source of ocean best practices, we sincerely hope, and obviously the member states will make their contributions. But if we want to call ocean best practices comprehensive, I'm not sure it would ever be definitive. We need much more than IOC content, and so we need the international agencies, the other organizations, networks, projects, and not forgetting industry to contribute their best practices to this. And finally, just to remind us that the decade is going to start in 2021, but already in the repository we are recording in the metadata which best practices are reporting which SDG targets. There's a new interface. Please take a look at it, give us feedback, and most importantly, please let us have your best practices. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jane and Pauline. Okay, we are moving to the third one, which will be the capacity development. Presentation made by Claudia. You have the floor.
Okay, I'm changing roles for 15 minutes. I will try to keep it short. So I was asked to describe some of the tools developed by IODE that can be used, can be an added values for capacity development, namely in the context of the upcoming UN Ocean Decade. So, to start with, we all, for capacity development, we're talking about people, and to organize capacity development events, meetings and training courses, namely, we start with people. We have to find the right people, the right experts, define venues for the events or training courses. These people are usually linked to institutes. And for this, IODE developed already a couple of decades ago a directory called Ocean Expert. I will explain a little bit better what Ocean Expert is. It's a directory of people which are linked to institutions. These people are most of us are affiliated to institutions. So anyone, and I believe pretty much, or I would hope everyone in this room would have will have a profile on Ocean Expert. If you don't, I strongly invite you to do so. This is a screenshot of one example. I just searched for Mr. Smith, and Dr. Tyler Smith came up, and is as an example for illustrating here, where you can input your details from academic degree to job skills, where you work, area in the globe, oceans, etc. And of course, link yourself to your institute. Above Ocean Expert, we have a tool that we call Paperclip, which is what organizes our calendar of events. And these events can be tagged in different categories. They can be a meeting, a conference like this one, can be a training course, an internship, and so on. We can also tag these events to different calendars, such as IOC overall or IOC capacity development, and so on. There's right now there's 24 different calendars that can be used to tag the events to, and we can also define the type of registration for a given event. It can be an open event like a conference, or it can be a closed event like an official meeting. For example, the IODE committee meeting that is starting tomorrow is one example of a closed event, so people can only go by invitation, or it can be by application like a training course. So once we have an event and we have participants, we can link those. And this is a very interesting tool because, well, sorry, I'm just a little bit ahead of myself. This is one example of the calendar, a screenshot of the calendar overall. And because I am slightly biased towards Ocean Teacher, I filter the events, and here I can only see events that are linked to Ocean Teacher. So you can actually refine your search in the calendar. And these are examples of how it looks after we populate the event, all the information on the event. You can see here a meeting. This is the meeting, the IODE committee meeting that is starting tomorrow. You can see already the number of people linked to the event, and you can search if you would be online. This is just a screenshot, the agenda and the number of documents that you are supposed to read by tomorrow, or perhaps actually before tomorrow already. And an example of details of the training course that is coming up, and how to register for how to apply for the training course. So the whole system, combining Ocean Expert and Paperclip, can give us a couple of derived products like country reports and what we call the alumni database. And this is because we've linked, during the whole process, we've linked the events to the people participating in such events. And because we are in Japan, just for the sake of the exercise and the example, I've searched what is how much Japan has been involved, and you can see one example. This would be an example of a country report. How many people are involved or members of subsidiary bodies of IOC, participating in official meetings or participating in training courses. And this would be then the alumni database for Japan. So I move on to another important piece of or tool developed by IODE that can support capacity development, starting, of course, by the regional training courses, the network that we've established. As mentioned yesterday by Adi during his presentation, we currently have 9 regional training centers across the globe, and one or some of the important added values of having a network of regional training courses is that, one, we already have trusted partners where we can go to organize training courses. We know that the infrastructure is there, is ready and suitable to organize international training courses suited for the region. They will be in charge of organizing all the admin and logistics, the local logistics, and also they have the necessary internet bandwidth that is needed to host the training courses. Also, they can deliver and they can translate training courses into the region spoken in the region, to the language spoken in the region. Further into tools developed by Ocean Teacher, as already mentioned yesterday as well, we have the Ocean Teacher e-learning platform. For this, we use a free learning management system called Moodle. It's been developed since the early 2000s and currently is being used in many countries. Over 50,000 websites are using Moodle for training purposes, ranging from primary school level to highly ranked universities and private companies to deliver training on the job as continuous professional development. It supports face-to-face learning, which is what we've been doing mostly up to now, but it can also support blended learning and further can support purely distance learning. By the way, Moodle stands for Modular Object-Oriented Dynamic Learning Environment. It's a mouthful. And I know that many in the room are somewhat skeptical or have mixed feelings about going into e-learning, that it will not, that we don't know exactly how to do this and it's not suited for what we need. Well, I know that some people will say distance learning has not been around long enough. I don't know how many geologists are in the room. I could certainly understand for their timescales, indeed, that would be true. I'm not so sure there is not enough accumulated experience using e-learning tools for us to embrace these tools. Yesterday, many times it was mentioned the digital revolution. I really believe it's the time to embrace it and to use it to our own benefit regarding training and capacity development. Further on, I would like to draw your attention to the Qingdao Declaration, already 4 years old, promoted by UNESCO, also promoting, it's the first UNESCO declaration promoting the use of ICTs for training and education. And if you have the chance to read this declaration, you will see keywords like access and inclusion, open educational resources, lifelong learning pathways, online learning innovations, international cooperation. So, as I just mentioned, this is the time to embrace a digital revolution and use ICT to promote capacity development. Another tool that we've developed within Ocean Teacher was an online application form. And when I started working for IODE, the applications for the training courses were still received using email, and people would submit a Word file, often still handwritten. This was still feasible for a little while, but once we moved on to the Ocean Teacher Global Academy and applications started piling up, things got a little bit overwhelming. So we decided to move into an online application form. For this, we use something very simple, which is called WUFO. It has many advantages, one being that we can customize, of course, each application to what we need with standard questions that will help us identify the best suited applicants. We can also use different languages, and this is very important, especially because one important criteria for us is the motivation of the candidate. And because of language barriers, of course, that someone will write a much better motivation in his own language, or a language that is more comfortable, than obliging everyone to use English for this purpose. So basically it makes it way easier for us to handle hundreds of applications like we now receive for some of the training courses. Last year, with the Ocean Teacher Global Academy and organizing training courses in many different places, we felt the need of writing down an Ocean Teacher manual on how to organize a training course. And this includes from the very first stages of organizing a training course, before the training course takes place, during the course, and also after the course takes place. And these diagrams here show the pre-course activities, so you can actually see that most of the work is done before the course starts, and then during the course and after the course takes place. Because these very much reflect, these guidelines very much reflect the ISO standard for learning services. Last year, after a process of 6 to 8 months, we finally got certified with the ISO standard for a learning services provider, which was carefully guided by Greg Reed in the whole process. This ISO standard is very much focused on the learner and on the learning services, but also on the management that goes along with organizing a training course, delivering a training course. And here you can see some of the details that we have to take into account while organizing the training course, first determining the learning needs, and then also designing the learning services themselves. So you can see that it's actually a very interactive process. How does this all link to the Ocean Decade? Well, IOC is tasked until the end of next year to have an implementation plan for the Ocean Decade. And one important aspect of the implementation plan is a capacity development plan for the Ocean Decade, where transfer of marine technology, training and education is a key aspect. So this is my last slide. I would like to leave the challenge of why not having an ocean academy for the Sustainable Development Goals focused on the ocean, and also for everyone, not only IOC, for everyone in the room. The tools are here. We have the tools. They are available. Please use Ocean Teacher as a tool for any training and capacity development you want to deliver. That's it.
Well, thank you very much, Claudia. Okay, for the first presentation, it's my pleasure to invite the Dr. Graham Allen to talk about the cooperation between JEVCO and IODE.
video.
It was okay.
No.
Let me check again. Stop.
How are we doing for time?
Late.
How are we doing for time?
Can you stand here?
And I have an hour. I'm standing between us and coffee, I believe. So, okay. I don't need my glasses. Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you for the opportunity to present here. The agenda does talk about GEBCO and IODE, but I'm going to talk about one specific project of GEBCO, and that's Seabed 2030. A quick introduction to myself. I am acting today. I'm the acting Seabed 2030 director. We're in the process of recruiting for a permanent director, but unfortunately the deadline for applications was last week. So if anybody didn't get their application in, it's too late now. I believe we've got a large bevy of very strong candidates, and we're looking to have a permanent director in post by June. And in the meantime, as I say, I'll be acting. My day job is Chief Information Officer at the National Oceanography Centre of the UK. I also have another job, which is more relevant here. I'm the head of the British Oceanographic Data Centre as well. Okay. So I'll just remind you what is GEBCO, and I've pinched this idea from Shintani, who's the chair of the GEBCO Guiding Committee, and all good questions have 4 answers. So GEBCO is the general bathymetric chart of the ocean. So it is a thing, it's an entity. I like to think of it as an information product or a data product, but it's a tangible output. It started in 1903. It was an initiative of His Serene Highness Prince Albert I of Monaco, passionate marine scientist, and brought together a group of ocean mappers and produced the first chart of the whole ocean. 1903, GEBCO moved forward, produced a series of charts, and in 1994 actually went online and produced the first digital chart from 1994. The current chart is from 2014, and that's a 30 arc second chart. GEBCO is also a joint project of the IHO and the IOC. So we have 2 parents, and we're managed by the GEBCO Guiding Committee. And what is GEBCO trying to achieve? Well, GEBCO is trying to produce the most authoritative, publicly available bathymetry data sets of the world ocean. And the keywords there are publicly available, so free to all. GEBCO doesn't tend to use the expression open data, but we have been for some time passionate about open, freely available products. Now, up until recently, GEBCO has also been relatively a voluntary community, a group of scientists and hydrographers that come together, are mapping the ocean for their day job, whether it's hydrography, whether it's research, and for a long time have felt combining the efforts into one definitive map of the ocean is the right thing to do. But it's been largely voluntary up until now. So, Seabed 2030, it's a collaborative project between GEBCO and the Nippon Foundation, and you can trace its origins back to June 2016. The Nippon Foundation funded a forum, the Forum of Future Ocean Floor Mapping in Monaco. We brought together the greats of ocean mapping and really just asked the question, what is the future of ocean mapping? And during that conference, Mr. Sasakawa, the chairman of the Nippon Foundation, really threw down the gauntlet to the ocean mapping community. And his vision was 100%, that's 100% of the ocean mapped by 2030. Quite bold, quite ambitious. So from June 2016, the following year to June 2017, there was a series of meetings between GEBCO and the Nippon Foundation to discuss what that project would look like. And out of that emerged 4 principles of what the project would look like. And a lot of these I've already mentioned today and yesterday. Partnership. So partnership is a key part of Seabed 2030. GEBCO has never tried to map the whole ocean itself. It's really the focus, the coordination, the fulcrum, and bringing communities together. So partnership's key to Seabed 2030. Sharing data, open data, sharing data and sharing information, the second principle. Human capacity development, a strong interest of the Nippon Foundation and also of GEBCO, formed the third principle. And the fourth principle, technology innovation. So we brought those 4 principles together, developed the Seabed 2030 project, and in June 2017, at the UN Ocean Conference, Mr. Sasakawa announced the start of Seabed 2030. The project itself didn't start until the 1st of February 2018. So we had our first birthday just 2 weeks ago. We're now 1 year old, moving into our second year. A very brief overview of the concept. Seabed 2030 breaks down into 2 distinct phases. There's a data compilation phase or stream of activity, and that's actually doing what GEBCO's done since 1903. That's aggregating all the existing data together and then publishing that data in the GEBCO Ocean Map. But at some point, we'll have collated all the existing data, and the projects will then move into a second phase, which we've coined the expression map the gaps. And at the moment, we're still in the planning phase of map the gaps. But as the project moves forward, the effort will move more from the data compilation into mapping the gaps, and then we'll have a slightly different project. And the data compilation will become more BAU, business as usual. And there'll be annual releases of the GEBCO products. So up until now, release between the products has been 3 to 4 to 5 years. We're now moving on an annual release cycle as more data becomes available. Management of Seabed 2030. On the left-hand side is the operational management of the project. The project on a day-to-day basis is managed by the Seabed 2030 project team, and they report to the GEBCO guiding committee. We as the project team have to have our work plan for each year. We work on a yearly basis. We have our work plan for next year endorsed by the GEBCO guiding committee, and we have our annual report, what we did last year, approved by the GEBCO guiding committee. However, on the right-hand side, we've formed a sponsors group, which consists of the IOC Secretariat, and you can see Vladimir and Julian over to the left there. Next to Vladimir is David Wyatt of the IHO at the back, and then moving to the right is Mr. Uno, who's the executive director of the Nippon Foundation, who'll be speaking this afternoon. I don't believe he's here yet, so no. And then there's myself in the middle, and then over to the right is Matthias Jonas and Mustafa Iptis, who are the IHO Secretariat. And then the gentleman furthest to the right is Martin Jakobsen, and then there's Mao Asibi, who's part of the Nippon Foundation. So the sponsors meet and input to strategy to the Seabed 2030. The structure of Seabed 2030, it's evolved from how GEBCO's operated for the past number of years. Central to it is the project team, and the project team are the leads of the regional and global centres and the director. We've created 4 regional centres and a global centre. They feed in and form the project team and do the day-to-day work. Top right are some of the existing GEBCO subcommittees. I won't go through all the acronyms, but the top one is the Regional Mapping Subcommittee. SCUFFN is the Undersea Feature Naming Subcommittee, and TSCOM is the Technical Committee of GEBCO. They still feed in and are a central part of Seabed 2030, hence the arrow. Just below the GEBCO committees is the IHO DCDB, the Data Centre for Digital Bathymetry. Well, there's no arrows there because this is a structural diagram. The IHO DCDB is very much part of the project, and there'll be some arrows on the next few diagrams indicating where DCDB fits in. But it's not part of the Nippon Foundation funded part of the project, hence no arrows. The Nippon Foundation over to the left there, and then there's an advisory group which will be the conduit for external strategic advice into the project, which we're just forming at the moment. Just to give you where the locations of those 4 regional centres, so over on the right are the list of the regional centres. We split the ocean into 4 regions. There was some discussion of how many regions were required, so it's been a compromise to have just the right amount, not too many, not too few, and to a large extent based on existing GEBCO activity as well. So there's the North Pacific and Arctic Ocean, which is coloured kind of grey at the top there. That's a shared regional centre, shared between Stockholm University in Sweden and the University of New Hampshire. The Southern Ocean Regional Centre is based at Arvi. That's down the bottom there in the blue. The Indian Ocean Atlantic Regional Centre, the green, based at Columbia University. And then the final regional centre, the South West Pacific Ocean, is again a shared centre between 3 organisations in New Zealand: NIWA, LINS, GNS. And down the bottom to the left, the Global Centre, which is located at the British Oceanographic Data Centre, part of the National Oceanography Centre in the UK, the yellow dot in the middle. And across those centres, we now have the order of 24 staff working in the regional and the global centres. Moving on to the data flow, and I'm going to work from the right and I'll work backwards. I'm not actually an ocean mapper, I'm not a marine scientist. I'm more of a software developer, so I always think of user requirements and work backwards. The grid itself, or the products, will be created by the Global Centre, and the Global Centre will take the regional products from the regional centres. So the regional centres will create regional products, pass them to the Global Centre. The Global Centre will stitch those 4 regional products together to create the global product. The data will come from various sources, ideally from the IHO DCDB, but we acknowledge there's data coming from many different sources. And to the far right, as I've just mentioned, a whole set of different data collectors. This is a scientific conference and it needed an equation. So here's the one equation. And this breaks it down. I used to be a mathematician, so I keep it nice and simple. And I've distilled it this simple because when we announced Seabed 2030, we got an awful lot of press coverage, the Times, the BBC, Reuters, Newsweek, and however much you explain these concepts, we're often, if not always, misquoted. And if you took top left there, 18%, we're often quoted that the ocean has been mapped 18%, or 18% of the ocean is mapped. Well, we don't actually know how much of the ocean is mapped. That's one of the objectives of GEBCO, to answer that. And if we go to my equation, I think very simply that X is the data that's today in GEBCO. Y is the data that's been collected but not yet in GEBCO. So X plus Y is actually what's being mapped. And then Z is the gap, that's the unknown. Now, at the moment in the 2014 30-second grid, X equals 18%. So of all the grid cells in the GEBCO grid, 18% have a data point in them. 82% don't. So that's the challenge for Seabed 2030. And if it's okay, I'll just keep going a little bit longer and eat into coffee time. I won't labour this fact other than just to reiterate that partnerships are key to Seabed 2030. Skipping over, so back to my simple equation, I just wanted to highlight the role of technology innovation in the project. We have entered a team into the Shell Ocean Discovery X Prize. We GEBCO Nippon Foundation, are a finalist in that competition, and we find out soon how well we did. When I give this presentation, I'm often asked, given that GEBCO has been operating since 1903, why do we think now we can actually achieve the vision? I think that breaks down into two answers. The top one, there is now a compelling need, and I won't labour this fact because I think Vladimir and Julian and others yesterday very clearly articulated the need. The earth, the ocean is under stress. We do have a compelling need to understand the ocean. But underneath, I think there's three solutions come together. And the key one for me, well, all of them are important, but I'll just talk about the first one in the middle, autonomy at the moment. So if you want to map the ocean seabed with existing ships, it's going to take many hundreds of years. But we're just at that tipping point where marine autonomous systems will give us the ability to map the ocean bed autonomously. And I just show the Argo network as an example. Who would have believed when this started in 2000, was it, that today we'd have nearly 4,000 floats collecting data from across the whole ocean? So autonomy, marine autonomous systems is the key to the realizing the Vision 2030. And then the other two innovations, and innovations of different types that are going to allow Seabed 2030 to realize its vision, and that's the general information technology that's happened, that innovation that's happened, the cloud, big data, the Internet of Things. We now have the technology infrastructure to deal with the data that we're talking about. And on the right-hand side, there's the cultural innovation. I do believe now that society is reforming its relationship with data, and that's scientific data and social media data. But more and more you'll see open data becoming mainstream and benefiting society. So how can you get involved? Well, give us your data. Support data sharing, contact the regional or global centres, and promote GEBCO activities. Some up and coming events, there is a regional mapping event in Niwa in a couple of weeks. Please go along if you feel free. And the first JEBCO grid since seabed 2030 started is out soon, next month sometime. It'll be a 15-arc grid. We haven't calculated the percent coverage yet, so it's above 18, but we're still waiting for the mappers to actually calculate the coverage. And I'll leave it there with thanks, and thank you to the time over and a little bit, and I'll stop.
Thank you, Dr. Lang. So all the speakers for this session are kindly asked to come to the front stage for the discussion part. I'll ask Sergey to moderate the discussion part of this session. Maybe 7 minutes or something. Yeah. 7 to 10 minutes.
Okay, we're stealing 7 minutes for the discussion from the coffee break, and yeah, while I don't know, the questions for the audience will be probably addressed to Arno rather than the speaker, Tobias. Anyway, do we have any questions to these 4 very interesting and very different presentations from this morning? Yes, I see one, please. Can we have a mic?
Yeah, thank you for the presentations. Just a question for the best practices. It was a really nice talk, but maybe a little bit abstract. Could you give some examples of best practices? Maybe some of the you mentioned articles that were sent into the journal. So what does that mean? What best practices?
Okay, we have about 626 best practice records at the moment, and the well-known ones, the ocean acidification, those sorts of ones that people, the Winkler titrations, those sorts of things are all in there, and those are the ones that come to the top. So if you ask me what are we have those sorts of metrics for the repository, and you will see that those are the most viewed ones. So we can actually deliver a metric on which are the most viewed best practices, and I'm very happy to provide that to you. But I think you were asking more about the journal papers as well?
Not necessarily, just some examples of best practices.
Okay.
So, yeah, the Go Ship Manual, in terms of the journal, there was a recent publication on Indian Ocean applications of moorings and how to do that. The work that was done on Fix 03 with moorings is another example in Europe. And we have a very nice paper going through review now, which is taking all of the manuals that Australia has created and explaining how to use them and what their value is.
Yeah, I was just about to say, you know, we have the JCOM, we have WMO, we have the Argo, we're starting an EdModNet collection, hopefully, ISIS, all the main networks and organizations and agencies are now starting to contribute. A lot of them have technical guidelines and they're all allowing us to have those into the repository. But we need content, and that was my plea at the end of my talk. Is there one particular one that, if it's in there, that would mean that the repository was a good repository? Sometimes people, you know, when they look for their own paper in a collection, is there one favorite that you would specifically say, that's in there, you're doing a good job? I mean, that would be actually an interesting comment.
Yeah, there was an interesting story. We were at a meeting in Brussels a couple weeks ago, and somebody came to us and said, well, what's the value of your repository? Like the question you're asking. And so I said, what are you interested in? And it was phytoplankton. And so she came to the repository, which means we opened up the web, and we can demonstrate it to you today. And she went through, and all of the articles that she was interested in were already in the repository. So she was excited, and she's going to write now her own article to contribute.
Okay, thank you for the question. Thank you, speakers, for the answer. I see, yeah, some more. Cindy? Yeah, then. If it's quick, go on. I mean, yeah, I see some raised hands in the back seats, but yeah, If you can be quick.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. You know, I would like to ask a question. The International Standard Organization, to how many of you this applies? To all the speakers, please.
Okay, thank you.
ISO.
Well, I'm not sure I followed the question. Well, we've already are following the standard for learning services provided.
The answer is yes, then?
Yeah.
The answer is going to be yes. I was asked by the European Commission, is it only best practices or is it best practices and standards? And the answer was it was both.
Yes, the answer is yes, and interoperability is key. So standards are key to the exchange of bathymetric data.
For ODIS also, it's yes, like Tobias explained in his presentation. He tries to follow all those international standards as much as possible, of course.
Great, thank you so much. I saw Nadia, I think, and yeah, and Kevin. Yeah, please.
So this JEBCO dream for the modelers is something that we really look forward to have a better bathymetry for our forecasting activities. This is as important as to have the temperature and the salinity, in some cases even more. So there is an opportunity, I think, in the decade of the ocean or in the future to have much more of the data collected by research vessels. And we need to move forward in that direction because there's a lot of data that's collected by bathymetric data collected by these research vessels that never flows anywhere. So we need to have a real-time GTS data communication system like for bathymetric data from research vessels. And I think that IODE and IOC should sponsor that strongly in order to finally achieve the goal. What do you think? Should we?
I completely agree. And Seabed 2030's got two, I was referring to them as phases, but they're two work streams. One is collecting data, the top one in my diagrams. The second one, advocacy. We need to be advocating for these kinds of practices. And it's not just data from research vessels, but there's a whole crowdsourcing initiative run by the IHO that we need to tap into. There's the whole maritime industry that's collecting data, bathymetric data, and also industry partners that want to contribute, and we're reaching out to them. So there is a lot of networking, a lot of reaching out to all these communities. So completely agree, and thank you for the comment.
Yes, thank you so much. We're running out of time. We will break up for 15 minutes. Will be a quick coffee break and take an opportunity, catch the speakers during the coffee and answer your questions during that time. Thank you so much. And we will reconvene in 15 minutes sharp.
Okay. I'm so tired.
I don't know whether you're checking that.
No.
No, you're not checking. I can send it to you.
But I didn't see it. It's more like I didn't. I have
Are you
my,
using this one? It was
it's that one. Okay. Yeah, I will.
At Gmail.
I also see
it. Are you
it.
using it?
It's my Gmail for work. But yes, I see it every day, basically.
Okay.
But yeah, thanks. Just a second, so that just a second for me to save this. Yeah, okay. Because I forgot to stop the recording. Because of this, I saw. So it's okay. Yeah. Yes. Now I'm. Give me here. Yeah. Okay. Can you guide me, please? It's gonna be this. And what format is this? Oh. What? I've never seen this. What is this?
CTG program.
I'm gonna. Can I ask the help of Arno or Peter, please? If some IT backup, please. If he cannot solve it, I'm afraid. This gentleman here for the next session is bringing something, and I have no clue what this is.
This Mac ですか? This Mac?
This is Mac
Yes.
with the office
Mac
environment.
はちょっと困るな。自分のやつでずれちゃう。大丈夫。What? This is my first talk is mine.
Okay,
I'm a
but
little bit afraid. But please.
Switch this off.
So this is the last session. Now I'm going to start recording this, but sorry. file with for this. So I want
Yes.
to make sure that it is the right file.
Just
Because there are
new,
two-
new file.
Yes, but there was already one exactly numbered, so I don't want to run any risks. Because it was put, yeah, we are organizing it in a slightly different way. Okay, so
Device.
so is this one yours? Is this yours or this one? You see, because I have two now.
This one.
Not the,
This
not.
key.
It's the PowerPoint.
PowerPoint.
Not
So just delete it.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure, so that there is no.
And this is the new one?
This
is
7.0.
just a few minutes ago.
Yeah, I can. I have so.
Few minutes ago.
So 9.
Okay, that's fine.
This is the one. Okay. No, I wanted to double check so that there's no confusion of versions.